I'm Bruce Fummey. Positives and negatives, acids and alkalis, Rangers, Celtic, Yin, Yang, Jedi, Sith Lord, Jacobites and Covenanters. They're all kind of opposites, aren't they? And some should never be mixed. Which may seem a strange thing to say, given that Jacobites didn't arrive until Covenanters had all but disappeared. But we'll come back to that later. Today, I'm going to show you two places in Edinburgh that are inextricably linked by a 5-minute walk as I tell you about the anti-Jacobites, the Covenanters. If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Scotland in August, too hot for a hoodie. If an American writer produced a series of books in which a time-travelling Englishwoman goes back to meet a dashing hero of a people persecuted, forced to swear allegiance to a king that they could never in their hearts support, imprisoned until they did, or deported, massacred, or sent bravely to the scaffold proclaiming their loyalty to a higher cause, the books would probably sell better if the hero wore a kilt. Ladies love a man in a kilt. Sombre, sensible clothes. Not so much. But whilst Covenanters and Jacobites were opposite sides of a political or religious coin, some of the parallels are striking. The Jacobite story was sparked by a tinderbox when the Catholic James VII of Scotland and the II of England was delivered of a son. 7 English parliamentarians invited William of Orange to come and guarantee the Protestant religion. Were their fears justified? Over the next 60 years, supporters of James were forced to swear allegiance to this new king or face the consequences. The massacre of Glencoe, Jacobite resistance, hangings, drawings, quarterings, and a battlefield loss at Culloden that was followed by summary execution, starvation, and deportation. Now, the birth of baby James might have been the spark, but the tinder had been drying out in preparation for some time. You see, 51 years before the ousting of James VII and the start of the Jacobite cause, his father, Charles I, sparked the tinderbox of the Covenanter story when he insisted that the English prayer book be read in Scottish churches. On the 23rd of July, 1637, here in St Giles Cathedral, Jenny Geddes threw a stool at the minister, causing a riot. Now that may have been the spark, but the tinderbox had been drying out in preparation for some time. Ever since the Reformation back in 1560, there had been a struggle to decide who was the ultimate authority in Scotland, the Presbyterian Church or the monarch. The fact that for a large part of that time he was also the monarch in England made things even more complicated. A year before the stool was thrown, causing the shit to hit the fan, Charles I had won a victory with a new book of canons which said that anyone denying the king's supremacy would be excommunicated. Pressure had been building. So when Jenny Geddes threw her stool, it was because she couldn't hold it in any longer. Look, that's 2 crappy jokes and we need to get on to a later event, so come on. For the next 6 months, the Protestant people of Scotland started to organise. An Edinburgh solicitor and a Fife minister drew up a document which would become the National Covenant. And so, on the 28th of February 1638, people lined up here in Greyfriars churchyard to sign a document that said that Presbyterianism was the national church. And it was the community under God and not the crown that was the authority in that church. Copies of the covenant were sent all over the country. Many signed willingly. Some signed in their own blood. Some signed under duress. You see, signing this document was tantamount to signing up for military service. If you want to know what happened next, then I've got a playlist called The War of the Three Kingdoms, English Civil War. You'll find two videos in that playlist that are relevant: how the Scots started the English Civil War and who killed Charles I. Watch them. But I want to jump to the period after Charles I has been executed. You see, the Scots may think that the king can never be above the church, but they're appalled at the idea that he should be executed. They invite his son Charles to be crowned Charles II, but only on condition that he sign the covenant, accepting that he's not above the church. Now, when Charles eventually did become King of England, Scotland and Ireland, he conveniently forgot what he'd signed up to. Within a year, the Rescissory Act was passed in Scotland, overturning all the legislation of Covenanter parliaments, placing the king over the church and state, and the bishops in between. The next year, all the churches other than the national church was banned, and any office bearer in the church was required to renounce that covenant. Around a third refused. Now, the later Jacobites who fought for James tended to be concentrated in the north. These Covenanters who stood against his brother were most concentrated in the south and west. Thrown out of their churches, they would meet in open-air conventicles. Thousands of people would turn up to stand on field and moor in Scottish weather to listen to a Presbyterian minister, the very act of which was seditious lawbreaking. In 1670, Parliament issued the Act against Conventicals. Any minister who organised an open-air church meeting was liable to execution. If somebody captured or handed him in, they received 500 merks. If somebody killed him, the killer was indemnified. Whatever commitments Charles had made before, whatever bloodshed and atrocities had been visited during the War of the Three Kingdoms, it was the years after the war that became known as the killing times. Can you imagine a time when a farmer called Arthur Ingalls of Netherton was shot dead whilst looking after his cattle? The justification given by the troops was that he was alone in a field with a Bible in his hand. He must have been up to no good. This was Scotland in the 1670s. In the run-up to that, let's be honest, murder of Arthur Ingalls, Covenanters started to post sentries at conventicles. Some started to defend themselves. On the 1st of June 1679, John Graham of Claverhouse, the persecutor of Covenanters, so hated that he was known as Bloody Clavers, was out looking for conventicles, and he found one at Drumclog. But a sentry had fired a warning shot to the worshippers. As the service came to a close, the preacher, Thomas Douglas, said, "You've got the theory, now for the practice." Thus warned, by the time Bloody Clavers arrived on the scene, the men were lined up for violence. Short skirmishing advances got bigger and bolder until the government troops turned and fled with heavy losses. Needless to say, this buoyed the amateurish Covenanters and worried the government. A bit like the Battle of Preston Pans in 1745. The Covenanters advanced in Glasgow, but lightly armed and amateur made no headway, and so they retreated south, crossed the Clyde, camped on the moor north of Hamilton, and waited. The government issued a proclamation saying that if they didn't give themselves up within 24 hours, they'd be treated as traitors to whom no pardon was allowed. They were starting to take this ragtag mob seriously. On the morning of Sunday the 22nd of June, the Lord's Day, two forces of 5,000 to 6,000 stood on either side of Bothwell Bridge. One, a poorly equipped group of amateurs who were racked with division, but sure God was on their side. The other, properly equipped government troops. It reads like a Jacobite tale, and yet it's not. After stout initial resistance, the Covenanters broke up in panic. Hundreds of prisoners were taken after the battle. Two of them were ministers who were brought to Edinburgh and hung. But 1,200 Covenanters surrendered that day, and they were brought here as the hunt began for anyone else involved. Now, Edinburgh didn't have accommodation for this many prisoners, so many of them were placed in here. Some of this has been built on and used for graves and monuments since. At the time, it was just a free space enclosed by walls, leaving the men out in the open from June to a Scottish November, with almost enough rations to survive. Some were tried and executed, some died here as they waited. Some were made to sign a bond of loyalty to the crown before being freed, and many were transported. By November, there were 270 remaining, and well, that's a story for another time. I often see our transatlantic cousins comment on how their ancestors were shipped abroad or fled persecution as Jacobites. I don't tend to hear them talk about those that were shipped as Covenanters. Now, in one way that's strange, because Covenanting Protestants seem to have been more prominent than Jacobites in the American Revolution. In another way, it's to be expected, because for some reason I think we here too get more caught up in the romanticism of the swashbuckling, kilted Highland rebel than his dour Presbyterian lowland equivalent. And yet, they're two sides of the same coin. It's just that when William of Orange replaced James VI in 1688, the coin flipped. This memorial commemorates 18,000 Covenanters martyred. That's a lot. That's more than the number of Jacobites that started the battles of Prestonpans, Falkirk Muir and Culloden combined. Maybe Presbyterian and Puritan Protestants did have something to worry about. In the coming days, I'll be telling more Covenanting tales. I'll also tell more Jacobite tales, because teams switch sides at half time. Until then, I'll leave a video on how these Covenanting Scots started the English Civil War. One or other will be coming up on screen now. In the meantime, ha mi an dóchas gwn bí lama alive. Cheery and drastic.